Hi, this is Zach with Worn&Wound. Today I'll be taking a look at the Nomos Orion 38 Datum. Nomos is a brand we've discussed a few times on the site and reviewed once before. They're a really cool brand based out of Glashütte, Germany, and they're one of only a couple brands currently in production that are able to make in-house manufacture movements at a relatively affordable price. The other watch we reviewed, the Club, starts at $14.50 for a manufacturer movement, which is quite exceptional. This watch, the Nomos, the Orion, comes in a few different sizes, and here we have the 38, and this is the newest version of the watch, which they released at Basel last year, and specifically this is the 38 Datum, and this comes in at $3,060, so it's a bit pricey, but once again you are getting a genuine manufacturer movement watch, so in the scheme of the watch industry it is a very good deal. It's also just one of the most exceptionally beautiful watches I think we've come across. It's remarkably detailed, it has very unique design features, and just really exceptional finishing all around. Has a silver-plated dial with gold batons on it, and then also flipping it over, and this is the star of the show, you have their in-house caliber movement here, which is also beautifully decorated. So yeah, let's take a closer look now. As the name describes, the Nomos Orion 38 has a 38 millimeter diameter and is the largest of the Orion series. There's also a 33 millimeter and a 35 millimeter, and 38 millimeters, though small by today's standards, I think is quite large for this watch, and probably like the max size because it wears larger than 38. And Nomos, they're kind of known for being a little bit playful with their language, and one thing they describe this as having kind of a saucer-like shape, and I think that actually describes it very well. The central case here, which you can see, is flows in kind of every direction. So you have a domed sapphire crystal, which has a radiused bezel here to a radiused case back, and actually even the crystal on the display itself is domed, which I don't recall seeing any other watch with a domed case back like that. So it just flows the whole way around, and then the lugs then are kind of a harder geometrical element that I think adds a little bit of masculinity to the watch and definitely kind of makes it a little bit larger feeling on the wrist, and in doing so actually makes it, I think, wear quite nicely. An interesting aspect of the lugs is that they are kind of tapering, so the space between the lugs, it's actually a 19 millimeter lug width, so 19 millimeter strap, but then it gets wider as it approaches the case, which is just very uncommon and kind of gives it an interesting look there. And they are long, so it is 47 millimeters lug to lug. But the watch, because of the shape, is also just, it feels thinner than it is, and it is already incredibly thin at 8.8 millimeters thick. So it's just this really lithe, fluid case design that's really quite exceptional. At 3 o'clock you have a crown here. It's about 5 millimeters wide. This has a manual wind movement, so you will be using that quite a bit, and it's quite easy to grasp. It has in a little bit of a designed, it's not just a fluted design. There's kind of a little scoop in before the end, and then it does say Nomos on the edge there. So it's a bit decorated. I think it's nicely understated, though. Flipping the watch over now, you can take a look at the case back, which shows off the Nomos Beta movement here quite well. Beautifully decorated movement. There's Glashütte striping all around, or Geneva striping. There's perlage underneath the balance, as well as kind of a sunbursting on the gears here. So it's, just absolutely stunning. Nomos are known for their kind of rigorous simplicity with their designs, often seen as being derived from the Bauhaus school, aesthetic, more so than perhaps some of their other watches. But this one, you can definitely see a lot of restraint used to create something that's very elegant, very pure, and well-balanced. So the dial on this watch, and there's actually other color variations, but this is kind of the classic Orion colorway. It is a galvanized dial with white German silver. It has a very interesting effect. It's a little bit metallic. It is kind of matte. It's very pale, but also has some warmth to it that I think is a little bit more interesting than a kind of a typical metallic kind of a steel dial or something like that. And it also picks up a little bit of the warmth from the gold from the batons, and just it just is a nice look to it. So the primary index here are these applied gold batons. Like I said, they're all equal length, and obviously there's one missing at 6 o'clock, and between each are black lines for the individual minutes. Very clean, very legible, even without any numbers. It's very easy just to kind of tell time at a glance. And at 6 o'clock, you have quite a bit going on. So you have a sub-seconds dial there, and once again, no numerals there, so it kind of fits in well. That is debossed a little bit, and then has some concentric circular kind of graining to it, so it has a little bit of a different texture. I think it's actually very, quite appealing looking. Then what's special with this model is that this is the Datum model, so it features the beta movement with this date, and this is what they call actually their long distance date. So it's a very, very large date font. So there are other Nomos models that have smaller versions, and I really, really like what this is doing here. You can get the watch without a date, and I personally think when I saw that the space between the sub-second dial and the edge of the case just felt a little empty, it felt a little unactivated because it doesn't have a golden baton. And here this does a really good job of doing that, and although it's the only numerical element on the dial and perhaps adds a little bit of busyness, it's such a clean execution. The date window itself curves and is a little bit of kind of a trapezoidal shape, so it just kind of doesn't jar, it doesn't feel jarring, doesn't feel like a hole through the dial so much as something that's integrated. And then the font used is this very elegant, thin font, and even the wheel itself, it isn't a crisp white, it's more of kind of a creamy color, so it just fits in perfectly, and I happen to just really like it there, and just the size of it also makes it very easy to read at a glance. The hands on here, very, very simple hands. They're just stick hands and not treated, but heated blue steel. They obviously work, very, very well with the aesthetic. They don't overweigh anything. And I really like the use of blue steel here because it kind of, this mix of colors. So you have the champagne from the silver dial, then you have the gold, and you have the blue. And though it's all very, very subtle, that does create an interesting palette. Taking a closer look now at the Nomos beta movement, if you've seen the alpha movement, it will look identical from this perspective. Really, the only difference is that it has the addition of a date mechanism. And the date is actually done in a patented way where it's a peripheral date. So rather than being stacked on top of the movement, which is what you typically see, thus making the watch thicker, it runs outside of it. And that's how they can keep this watch very, very, very thin. Movement itself, it's 23 joules, has a frequency of 21,600 beats per hour and a power reserve of 42 hours. Once again, just looking at the decoration, you can see that it's quite beautiful, really enjoyable to look at. You have blued screws, Geneva or Glashütte striping, perlage, and sunbursting on the plates. Using the beta movement is pretty straightforward, though it does have one quirk. With the crown out in first position, you'll notice it does have hacking seconds. You can set the time, as you would typically. So the one funny thing about this watch is that it doesn't have a quick set date in the way that you would typically expect, where you have two settings on the crown. Rather, it's more in the style of kind of a vintage watches. So to change the date, you go between 12 and about 9, and you can actually hear it kind of click and engage itself. So you do have to do that. That is a little bit more of a labor-intensive process than just turning the crown, but also it's kind of a reason to keep the watch wound up and set to the right date. And in the reality, it doesn't take too long unless you have to go from like the 19th back to the 18th, something like that. On the wrist, the Orion 38 wears extremely well. I really, really like the 38mm case size. I think because of the design, it's so flat and it's so full of the dial kind of edge to edge that it wears larger, about 40mm, in perception. But it's very, very comfortable. The lug to lug of 47 also works really, really well, and the slight curvature of that makes it just kind of hold to your wrist very nicely. But then the thinness of it, it's really quite remarkable. It wears it's just so comfortable and so light. Just a really easy watch to put on and kind of forget about, in a good way. And then aesthetically, this is a really interesting watch. I think it really mixes dress elements with kind of casual elements. I think especially at the 38mm size, you can pull this off with more casual clothing than I think the 35mm, which I think would feel a little bit dressier. And it also, it speaks, I think, to a vintage aesthetic. Obviously the Bauhaus was kind of in the 30s, but this kind of, I think, ranges perhaps, into the mid-century as well. But at the same time, it works, I think, very well with kind of a contemporary style, definitely kind of a more design-focused watch. It's a little bit not harsh. It's very kind of direct in its approach. The thin pencil-thin hands and the thin markers. There's something a tiny bit severe about it, which mixes very well with, I think, also the elegance of it and the flowing case design. So it's just a really interesting watch. Works well with casual clothing as well as with a suit. It comes on a really beautiful strap. Nomos puts all of their watches on cordovan straps, and this is the one it comes on is a black cordovan that is Horween shell cordovan, so it's really, really high quality. It is a 19 millimeter lug here. Also great to know, 19 millimeter straps, not the easiest to find, so if you could buy a replacement strap for this for your vintage watch and just have a really, really great cordovan strap for any watch, I think it works really, really well with the design of the watch. I mean, the palette here, the black, it's perhaps a little bit harsh, but I think you could mix this up and put a brown strap on here that bring out some of the more warmth in the dial, which I think would also be really, really nice. But, you know, for like in a dress scenario, this would go really, really well. Obviously, the gray suit, black shoes, something like that. And it's just very, very, if you ever worn a cordovan strap before, they wear very nicely. They have kind of almost like a plasticky leather feel that slowly kind of softens and just becomes really, really, really comfortable. So it's actually a really nice value adder for the watch. To wrap up, the Nomos Orion 38 Datum is a simply beautiful watch that I think is a really, really great addition to their collection, and I think as well as a great extension to the Orion line. 38 millimeters, I think, is a kind of an ideal maximum size for this watch. 40 would have been, I think, too big feeling, and at 38, you know, it works as a dress watch, as a casual watch, as an everyday watch for somebody, you know, I think if you have to go to an office a lot. It's not obviously a rugged watch. It's quite, you know, lithe and elegant and delicate, so, you know, I'd be cautious with it. But, you know, for all other circumstances, I think this is something that is quite easy to pull off. Will look really nice with different outfits, different styles, and different settings. And, you know, that's, you know, versatility is obviously a great value adder. On top of that, you know, another exceptional piece is that this does have an in-house manufacturer movement, and the watch does cost $3,060. So you are, it is an expensive watch, but, you know, for a manufacturer movement, it is still very well priced in the scheme of the watch industry. The date version, you are paying a kind of surplus for the date function. The non-date 38 millimeter Orion is about $500 less, so that is something to consider. I personally think that the date adds a lot to the watch. I think it makes it a little bit more casual, but it also is a very interesting date element to it. And I think that space underneath the second dial was a little awkward looking, in my opinion, on just the 38 version. So I personally like it a lot being there. Yeah, so please read the full review on worn&wound.com. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and Tumblr. Thank you.